He's right behind me, isn't he?
Gather around, everyone. It's time for a story.
You're listening to the Supernatural Tapes podcast with your host, MJ Dickson.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you are listening from in the world. I am your host, MJ Dickson, and welcome to the Supernatural Tapes. My guest on today's show is none other than Richard Estep. Richard began investigating claims of the paranormal back in 1995. He is originally from England, but now lives in Colorado, so unfortunately, we don't get to see each other that often. Richard is a phenomenal author. He has written so many books, I have actually lost count. But his books cover everything from the paranormal to true crime, war, and even medical journals. Richard has a really wide variety of knowledge. Everything from his workshops about writing to his journey in search of demons and cryptids and just anything weird. He is a very popular speaker at paranormal conventions and speaks at Paracons both in the UK and in the States. Although he is not really known for television, he has been on more paranormal shows than almost anyone else in this field. He has appeared on shows such as Haunted Case Files, which is also called Paranormal Investigators here in the UK. He was on Haunted Hospitals, Paranormal 911, Paranormal Revenge, and appeared as a guest on many other shows as well. I don't get to chat to Richard as much as I'd like to. He is one of my closest friends, and we always have a good laugh and a really good time investigating all things strange. So in this episode, we're discussing some of the Transatlantic psychic remote viewing experiments that we've been doing together. We're also going to have a chat about some of his latest books, including some that are yet to be released this year. And we'll be discussing a particular case known as the Fox Hollow Farm Murders. So be prepared for terrible dad jokes, a lot of laughter, and stories about phantom floating butt cheeks. Let's welcome my dear friend, Richard Estep. Hi Richard, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, MJ. It is a little after lunchtime here in the Rocky Mountains. It's evening for you there in the UK. How are you doing?
I'm good. I've had a very productive day. Been looking forward to our chat all day, so yeah.
Me too. It's been too long since we caught up, isn't it?
Absolutely. I feel like this entire episode is just going to be us chatting about our adventures and catching up on recent news.
And there is a lot to catch up on.
Absolutely. You've gone viral again. Or one of your books has gone viral.
It's always kind of surreal when that happens. I mean, viral is such a weird thing. My basement went viral first, just last month, after years of having, virtually no presence on TikTok. My basement library, which is an apocalyptic nightmare that I'm organizing, went viral. And now between that and Instagram, something like 1.5 million people have seen my basement, which is kind of weird.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is.
Damn. I didn't realize it went that viral.
It went super viral, and it still is going gangbusters. It's the rule of, this as a creator, but there seems to be a law where the amount of effort you put into a post or a video and crafting it and telling a story, the fewer people will watch it. Whereas, a 16-second video of my basement library I just threw on the internet at 2 a.m. It's seen by millions.
I'm not going to lie. After seeing that library in person when I was visiting you, I mean, it's impressive. It's ridiculous that is your home library.
It's my happy place, and I'm actually trying to make it feel a little happier now. Throw in some rugs and some softer lighting and a reading chair. I don't spend a lot of time reading down there. It generally is the kind of place where I go to pull a book for reference, but I'm looking at changing that a little bit, you know? Libraries are those soft, quiet places in the world where I feel most at home.
I mean, you would never find me if that was in my house. I would just be in there permanently. Speaking of books, I've lost count of how many you've written now. What's your tally? What are you up to?
So have I, honestly, having done zines and things like that as well. So let's go with like 35 was my last count, with quite a few more contracted for the remaining 3 years.
Incredible. We are going to talk about some of our adventures. We first met at Bodmin Jail. That was, when was that? 2017?
Oh, good Lord. It's got to be 8 years ago now, hasn't it? I put together a crew because I was researching Bodmin Jail with our friend Kirsten, who was at the time one of the tour guides there and went on to become paranormal manager for a spell. I brought you in not really as a medium or a psychic, because you weren't advertising that back then.
No, I was still in the mediumship closet.
So I brought you in primarily just as an investigator that I'd wanted to work with and had some respect for, and we had quite the adventure on that.
It was intimidating because I was with a bunch of people that I didn't know, but the investigation is still the investigation of one of my scariest moments ever, which I'm pretty sure is the only F-bomb in that particular book. That was, terrifying moment of feeling somebody grab my hair in the condemned cells area.
Yeah, having your hair grabbed is not something you want anyway when you're not expecting it, but certainly not in a prison cell. It never goes well after that, does it?
I should be in the Guinness Book of Records with the most swear words in one sentence, in a breath.
Yeah, Tourette's is a terrible affliction, as we all learned.
I mean, it was a really good investigation, but we've investigated several places after that. So let's have a chat about some of our favorites. Before we do, I have very bad news for you. The Highwayman Inn closed down.
No, the Shepton Mallet?
Yeah, so no more...
Phantom floating arses.
Yeah.
Phantom
You get to tell that story. I can just throw that out there and you can tell it. But I'm sad. That means, was it a ghost arse? Was it an actual one? Who knows?
Who knows? The Phantom Arse of ye old Shepton Mallet. That is definitely one of the funniest moments we've had, I think, on an investigation. So we had spent 4 nights investigating Shepton Mallet Prison, which was phenomenal. There were some great spooky things that took place over those 4 days. And we had a few of the Sage tribe with us for a couple of nights. And then it was just a small group of us for the other 2 nights to do the research for the book. And it was when we returned back to the old inn, 4 o'clock in the morning?
Something ridiculous like that, yeah.
You know, just stood outside, getting ready to go to bed and gathering equipment. When we looked up at the window, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, there was just a random, very big, white bear bottom.
Sideways, as I recall.
Sideways.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly saying, "That's an arse," and it was at a 90-degree angle to somebody who would have been standing up.
But the problem was that everybody was pretty much accounted for at the time, our group anyway. And at 4 in the morning, when you see their butt cheeks in a window, you kind of think that, it's a bedroom window, but we soon discovered it was a hallway.
Right, so it was a floating arse in a hallway window. And I don't think any of our team would have had the barefaced cheek to do something like that. So I can't explain it to this day. And whether the Highwayman is now empty, or if anyone's living there, I don't know, but it would behoove the next occupant to keep a close eye on those windows after dark.
I know, I was really disappointed because I was just at Shepton Mallet this last weekend for a great investigation. And again, full-bodied apparitions, footsteps, cell doors closing, great EVPs the entire evening. It was a really good time, but unfortunately we couldn't stay at the Highwayman, and I was determined to go and investigate the old Phantom Arse of Shepton Mallet.
And you couldn't do it.
We couldn't do it. I was really disappointed.
So there's no pub in town now?
No.
What?
I know.
Oh my goodness. What are you going to do after an investigation? I mean, Shepton's one of my favorite investigations. I mean, other than trying to use a phone there because the cell service was terrible, But yeah, I'm really sad that there's no pub in town.
The other place that we spent quite a bit of time was the Skirrid Inn, and that was
Oh, hey, we're back to bare asses.
we are. You had a bit of a bare ass experience. Do you want to tell the listeners about that? Because that's your story to tell.
It's like a near-death experience, but less pleasant. A bare ass experience. You know, maybe we can talk to Cal Cooper and Kieran O'Keefe and see if there is an SPR category for the bare ass experience of the paranormal. Make a note of that, would you?
I certainly will.
Let's get some academics on board to rigorously critique this. But yeah, so I was put on request in the most active room, room 1, and it's a huge room, and then the bathroom is like down some stairs, so it's definitely an ensuite bathroom within like a stone's throw of the actual room. You have to go down some stairs into a separate bathroom. So I remember I was getting up for the day. This would be probably before lunchtime, right? Because we worked late, got up late, had breakfast, went back to bed, got up to begin the afternoon. And so bright sunshine, like, you know, so many paranormal experiences happen in the middle of the day, not just in the dark of the night. And I leave my phone on the bed. I go down and I'm getting set up to like brush my teeth. And, you know, there was no shower in there. So I think I'm going to run a bath so I can discuss. And then I hear my phone ringing. So I'm like, I run back up. I check it. It's insurance call or something from the States. I come back down and the tap, if I remember correctly, the tap has been turned on like full blast and is dumping into the sink, if memory serves. And I'm just like, wow, something here is manipulating the taps, you know, which I thought was kind of creepy, but great. Didn't give much thought to the fact that whoever or whatever did it, you know, might be watching me and that I was absolutely stark as naked. So we went about our business, and you and I and our colleagues, we did some live Patreon stuff, as I remember.
Yes.
Some EVP stuff and then some Ouija board stuff. And I'll let you pick up the story there.
We did. We had the camera pointed at the Ouija board and all our Patreon members involved in our live investigation. And somebody asked, did you see Richard naked? And the Ouija board started spelling out F, U, and we both kind of looked at each other like, oh boy, this is live, what do we do? And then it spelt out the word funny and then your name. And both of us were like, phew, could have been a lot worse. But yeah.
It's the best Yelp review I've ever gotten.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
We also captured a full-bodied apparition on camera during that investigation.
Down in the bar downstairs. Yeah, that's right.
In the restaurant area. That was also like 4:00 in the morning.
Yeah, completely unintentional, right? It's not like we were clued in to have the camera facing that way. And it's one of those things that always makes me wonder how often this stuff is happening and our camera is facing the wrong direction and that it goes completely unnoticed, you know? We do love the Skirrid, and we cannot encourage you enough to go check it out yourself.
Yes, it is one of my favorite places. I'm actually back there again in 10 days. I am back investigating at the Skirrid. It is a wonderful location, so if you ever have the opportunity, do check it out.
Another of our favorite haunts is Ashmore Estates, here on the other side of the pond, my adopted side of the pond. I cannot wait to start walking those haunted halls with you and some of our Sage Tribe friends in just a few weeks now. It's coming up fast, isn't it?
It is indeed. So we are back there in May for our Haunted Ashmore Paranormal Weekend. And that's going to be really cool because it's your Patreon members, my Patreon members, and we're going to do daytime investigations, nighttime investigations. We got a bonfire evening with some ash s'mores and campfire tales. I'm very much looking forward to that. Some ghost stories around a campfire. We've got a barbecue, and we have decided on some mystery adventures over the weekend as well. So
very much
side quests.
Side quests, yes. Side quests and story time seem to always be a thing with the Sage Tribe. But Ashmore was a really interesting place. Besides the fact that it was so damn cold when we were there.
So cold I passed a crying penguin.
But we definitely had an interesting couple of days investigating there and some talks. I think my favorite part of that whole weekend was the very subtle EVP sessions done by the Kling brothers.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So you wrote a book about Ashmore.
Called it Some Call It Home. I know that that's Robin's kind of tagline for Ashmore. And I think it fits so well because, it's easy for, without getting too much into this side of things, there are those location owners and that will exploit their location without any kind of compassion, and they don't care about its reputation. And then you have Robin, who, keeps an eye on the fact that his home Ashmore was a home for those who had no home. A poor farm was the kind of place where, if we had them today, it would provide a place for people to go and keep them off the streets, with self-sufficient, self-sustaining. And you had maybe a dysfunctional family, but certainly a family at Ashmore Estates. And, television has shown it to be dark and scary and demonic, all claims that I question. There's some aggression there, absolutely. I think that there is at least one aggressive, probably human spirit that it behooves us to be wary of. But for the most part, they're people. And we do need to remember that we are essentially guests in their home, So I called the book Some Call It Home, and I can't think of a better title, thanks to Robin, to describe Ashmore Estates.
I remember walking through the initial walkthrough that I did when we first arrived, and there was nothing demonic. There was nothing, like the TV shows make it out, as you said. Everything's a demon, everything's terrifying. I remember bursting into tears, and I just needed to take a moment and just leave the property, just to go and take a walk outside, because it was so overwhelming. It was just such intense sadness. And walking up the staircase and feeling a little girl grab my hand and walk up the stairs with me, and you turn around and said, yeah, we know exactly who that is. There were a couple of moments, and there was also the member of staff who had very sadly passed away in the car accident, getting to meet her family as well. That was really overwhelming. But I am excited to go back. There was something I actually wanted to find out from you. A lot of these places would have been a lot more active during the day, obviously. They would have had sort of a lights out bedtime. One of the things that I came across in Shepton Mallet, obviously it's a prison, completely different location, but when they put people in segregation, it was quiet time. They weren't allowed to speak at all. So during the day, it would have been just as quiet. It would have been after hours where they would have kind of spoken to whoever was about. Do you think it's the same at Ashmore, where if they were put in sort of, the upstairs rooms where the electroshock therapy and all of that was up on the third floor, do you think they would have had quiet time during the day, or do you think it'll be more active during the day?
It's important to remember that the electroshock therapy came in relatively late in Ashmore's life, when it was a mental health care facility. So for the majority of its life, it was a poor farm. And farmers keep those hours where they're up before the sun, and they're usually in bed around about the time or not long after the sun sets. And then they're sleeping. And of course, farming is some of the hardest, most demanding physical labor you can engage in. So I've always found Ashmore to be much more active when the sun is in the sky. And having spoken to quite a few investigators, you do get results at night, don't get me wrong. But I think the stuff that's related to the poor farm function itself, you're more likely to get between sunrise and sunset. So probably no sleeping in during that event, right? We should be hitting that place early when the cock crows and seeing what we can get at 0, early 100.
I'm looking forward to the daytime investigation, purely because the last time we were there, obviously during the day, we were doing a lot of talks and things and investigating in the evening. Now, I had the opportunity to walk around the place on my own during the day on the Sunday, and there were a lot more shadow figures, a lot more footsteps. It seemed a lot more active during the day. So I think that is the way forward for future investigations, is spending more time, as you say, during the daytime hours.
Or a bit of both. I found that it was like a switch was flipped. You started to get, we think of our time as after midnight and before 3 or 4 a.m., I think Ashmore is very much the exception to that. And I think more and more locations, people are starting to recognize it. I suspect it's always been that way, but it's just so counterintuitive to our way of thinking. Plus, there's the fact that most of us in this field, we have day jobs. So we're so used to spending a night in a haunted location. It's not always as easy to spend days on end, which is why when I'm researching a book, ideally, I'll get to stay there around the clock and experience at least a few cycles of day, night in there.
So speaking of day and night and random times, we have done some very strange research together over the last few years, and usually it might be early evening for you or early afternoon on your end of the pond. But for me, at times it's about 4 o'clock in the morning when you decide to call me to do a psychic walkthrough via Zoom.
It's usually well worth it though, right? It's often in a place that, number one, I like to spring it on you because people are always going to say, oh, you're in cahoots, you're priming her with this and with that. So I like to spring it on you whenever I can. And sometimes you're up for it and sometimes you're not able to, but we've had some intriguing results most of the time when we've done this. And I like that element of surprise for you.
I've had a couple of moments. I mean, I had that moment the other day. You were speaking at an event and I saw a random cowboy, outlaw guy stood behind you with his hand on your shoulder, just a really quick flash image of my head, and he had missing fingers. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to message you because I have no idea what this is about. And you were actually talking about the guy or had a picture of his grave in your presentation.
That's right. Yeah. I was at Tombstone for a Strange Escapes event with Amy Bruni. And you had told me in advance, I'm sure. Yes, it was in advance because I saw the message that it's someone with like a missing finger or fingers, which is, again, pretty specific. And I just filed it away. And you said this guy's either interested in what you're doing or you may be talking about him, which made zero sense to me at the time. But I should have paid attention because part of what I was presenting on was the history of the Boot Hill Cemetery. Hands down, inarguably the most famous cemetery in the Wild West, if not the United States, period. Everyone's heard of Boot Hill. I mean, there's a video game named after it. And so I was showing the attendees some of the more colorful and interesting headstones in Boot Hill. And lo and behold, if one of them wasn't a guy called something like Three-Fingered Jack.
Yep, Three-Fingered Jack.
Again, was really, really specific. So, yep, you were right on the money. And again, I let you know a couple of days later. It was specific enough that it's not the kind of thing you would be able to just randomly come up with or cold read, I think, We
actually had the opportunity to do our presentation about our Transatlantic psychic remote viewing sessions at Michigan Paracon. And we've done that talk at Sage Paracon as well. But I really think we need to add a few more experiments to it. So hopefully you have some coming up this year that we can turn into more of those weird psychic remote viewing sessions.
I have a few ideas. I definitely have some locations, and you're the last person I'm going to tell. So I'll keep everybody else posted. But yeah, you'll find out when your phone rings, which that's the joy of being my friend, right? There should be some to balance out all of the horror and misery. Never knowing when that phone rings, but it works both ways. I mean, there was that time I was leaving the Sally house and you messaged me to warn me that I was in danger from some dark, negative, oppressive, if not demonic entity, which ended up in me having what could have been a very nasty road accident.
That is still one of the moments where I was like, should I tell you? I don't want you to stress for no reason. I had no idea where you were. I was just kind of like, hey, listen, there is something real creepy that's turned up in my house. And I remember describing it to you as a tall shadow figure with these real long, creepy fingers and glowing eyes. And this thing seemed really malevolent. And yeah, you had a tire blowout at 70 miles an hour on a
more on the interstate. Yeah, I was lucky not to have been killed. So coincidence, was it just a failure of the tire, one of those manufacturing problems, defects? I mean, the timing seemed awfully coincidental, considering that you just warned me that this thing would do anything to stop me leaving Atchison and telling its story.
There have been several investigations that we've done, but I mean, I've had the opportunity to fly over to the States and actually walk some of the locations with you, which has been interesting to see what I get in person, as well as then matching it to your research. One of the experiments that we did that I didn't think was going to work was you were at a funeral home and I was in New Orleans hosting a tour when you asked me to randomly tune in and tell me what you see.
That's right. The Blumberg family residence, our good friends from the TV show We Bought a Funeral Home, imaginatively titled, but tells you everything you need to know. And so we were I think we started out, if memory serves, like in the embalming room, which has been converted into a cigar lounge. We took a walk through the house, and you were picking up on quite a number of hits that Heather, the owner of the house, was confirming for us as we went along. So the Transatlantic psychic hotline from Canada to New Orleans. Oh, I guess it wasn't transatlantic. You were on the same continent as me then.
For a change.
The intracontinental psychic hotline between the States and Canada. I'll give you fair warning that one of the things I'm plotting for the future, because your mum adores me quite rightly, you know, being the brains and looks of your household, and my personal purveyor of tea, I'm going to have your mum let me into your home someday without telling you when you don't know I'm in the country. And I'm going to ask you to do a remote reading for me then. And he's hoping you pick up some pretty weird and unpleasant stuff. Either that or I'll just Skype you. And at the end of the session, I'll tell you I'm sitting on your back doorstep, put the kettle on. Do you think you could detect proximity if I didn't tell you? If I was in your local pub, the Black Swan, would you know? Is there any difference between me being within, say, half a mile of you or 100 meters? Because one of the things that we did find at a location, MJ, was there was bleed over. Do you remember this? You were picking up on physical symptoms of somebody who was standing within 6 feet of me without knowing that she was unwell.
I also recall that you tried to, how could I put it? You lied very badly, I might add, that you...
I was economical with the truth.
Yes, very. That you were at a specific location and that you would be traveling for a minimum of 7 hours the following day to get to your next location for me to tune in, when in fact they were exactly a mile apart. And I called you out on that. I did pick up that I was like, there's something fishy going on here, because wherever you are seems awfully similar to where you were.
Is the distance? I always wondered this about, you know, this kind of remote viewing. Does it make any difference to you? I mean, right now we're talking over about 4,500 miles. We're recording this from our separate living rooms in the US and the UK. We're having a conversation. This wasn't even technologically possible 20 years ago, you know, but it's no different than if you were in my office in the front of the house and I was here. The quality of the call, is it the same with your mediumship, or does distance add any complications?
I do think that being closer does make things a bit clearer. And I only say this because of the New Orleans, Canada thing that we had done, because I was out of my house, which, I mean, I know my home, I know what's here. So when I tune in and I get something completely different, I know it's for you, wherever you are. It doesn't belong here. It's not from my little hometown. It's something completely different.
Right.
But when I was in New Orleans, I'm tuning in one of the most haunted cities in the States.
And world, arguably.
Yeah. And I was worried that, what if I get stuff that's from New Orleans and not meant for you? Like, how am I going to know the difference? How am I going to know if that's for a house that you're investigating in Canada?
Mm-hmm.
But it was really clear what was local to me and what was meant for you. It did seem a lot clearer being closer by, I guess.
Interesting. I've been thinking about involving you next time I return to the Queen Mary to research that project. I have my doubts because it's a pretty big ship and you're more about the medium ship. So.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? Richard! That was terrible!
And yet you laughed.
I apologize to any listeners out there for the absolutely awful dad jokes that you will hear throughout this episode. But yet they get me every time. So, You have written a book about the funeral home, a grave undertaking.
Yeah, the only book I've ever written where every alternating chapter is a drink recipe, courtesy of the master mixologist Aaron Blumberg. It's probably one of the most lighthearted books I've ever written, but if anyone's read it, I hope someone has. It's got moments that are extremely sad. For example, part of my team was Brad Blair and Tim Ellis, both wonderful guys, both incredibly funny men. Brad is one of those individuals who will go on a federal watch list if he sends a meme to the wrong person one day, and we were all downstairs in the basement in what was the old embalming room doing a Ouija board session, and made contact with what claimed to be the spirit of a lady, an elderly lady, that was very familiar with the house. And Noah, the teenage daughter of the family, had been experiencing this kind of watchful presence in her bedroom, a figure that would come in at night and sit on the end of her bed, not in a scary way. In fact, it seemed, if anything, protective, and maternal. And so she identified herself as this lady who had died, and Noah reminded her of her own kids, and she felt very protective of Noah. And, she told Noah through the board, I love you. And there was not a dry eye in the house. There really, really wasn't. I mean, I brought up Brad because even Brad had the same kind of tear in his eye that he gets when he has to write the checks to pay his talent at Michigan Paracon. It was an actual glint of a tear. It really, really moving. And sometimes you get blindsided because I thought that would be a lighthearted book, and it mostly is. But every investigation, every brush with the other side, as you know well, sometimes carries that human to human, those honest, raw, real human to human moments that will just sucker punch you in the emotions, and give you all the feels. So that's one of the reasons I keep doing this.
You've recently released a rather controversial book about your journey in search of demons. And it's not what people think.
No, if I've got a soapbox subject, it's this one. Well, that and why tea should be the mandatory drink across the entire planet. But I'm losing that fight. Yeah, I've always felt that having begun my paranormal journey in 1995 in the Midlands in the UK, I didn't run into demonic cases, quote unquote, demonic cases. One case maybe in Lincolnshire that supposedly there was an inhuman, malevolent entity in an abandoned church, but we just didn't see it. And then I came to the States. You had more of them. And our mutual friend, Jeff Belanger, makes the very astute observation that the vast majority of demonic claims in the US occur on the East Coast, primarily because of that Puritan connection that they have with their history. You don't tend to see nearly as many of them in the Midwest, the Rocky Mountains, West Coast, or anything like that. But reality TV, and I will just name the shows. I think Paranormal State was the first. Ghost Adventures was the second, where they started bringing demons. Ghost Hunters avoided it, which, Ghost Hunters, I think, predated both of those shows, but they didn't go down the demonic route, and hats off to them for that. But when Ghost Adventures and Paranormal State started doing this, and Paranormal State brought in Lorraine Warren, they were entirely all in on demons from the get-go. There's a huge bias, massive bias right out of the gate. And it soon became apparent that those shows with demons became highest rated shows, the most popular. That element of fear, that element of darkness, it's kind of up in the ante. So, when you watch a superhero movie, let's say you watch the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, he's fighting a bad guy, right? The Green Goblin. Then you get to the third one, and there are like three big bads, because how do you get scarier than one villain? Well, two or three. You've got to up the ante every time, or people are not going to keep coming back to watch your movie or your show. So I think those shows went all in on demons to the point now where of course, Paranormal State is long gone, but with Ghost Adventures, this is not opinion, this is fact. It's a rare episode when they don't encounter something demonic. And so I got to thinking, North America just has this fascination with demons and the demonic. There are millions of people who believe in them, particularly in the Bible Belt states. What evidence is there for their existence? is this a real thing? Because they've been with us since time immemorial. As long as there have been people, we have blamed demons for famines and for natural disasters and, child death and all kinds of things. Your horse is lame, it's a demon, your loved one dies in the night, it's a demon. How much evidence was there for it? And I wanted to go on this journey, MJ, which you were a part of. We should talk about that in a minute, where I would try and speak to as many experts as I could. And at this point, I can already hear the sharpening of claws, and people are getting ready to say that there are no experts in the paranormal field. Well, there are. There are no experts in the paranormal, perhaps, with the possible exception of the parapsychologists we mentioned earlier that have, doctorates in parapsychology. But there are expert neurologists, there are expert physicians, there are expert mental health clinicians. I talked to those individuals about this. I talked with a stage illusionist. I talked with a bishop and an exorcist, trying to give this rounded view, this comprehensive view of the demonic. And some of those answers really surprised me.
We had the opportunity when you were doing the research for that book to celebrate your 50th birthday at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. But it took a turn. It took a very interesting turn.
Yeah, I'll never forget my 50th for that reason. We went up to the Stanley. You'd never been, I wanted to take you around, show you around. And our good friend Aidan Sinclair and his partner Becca Knight invited us to their theatrical show. Now, Aidan is skeptical. He was considerably more skeptical when I first met him when he was in his early days at Stanley. Working in a haunted hotel tends to ameliorate your skepticism somewhat. So he's pretty open-minded, but his show, it involved tarot cards and things like that. And he did know that I was working on a book about demons. And of course, I get up on stage as part of his act, and I'm invited to select a tarot card, which he's going to tell me what the card is without seeing it. And of course, what card do I pick? It's the devil, which I thought was very cool. But also, he casually let slip. He's a collector of strange artifacts, weird artifacts. And one of them purports to be the diary of Father Bishop, who was one of the key players in the 1949 St. Louis exorcism case on which William Peter Blatty based the novel The Exorcist. I say purports to be because, Aidan bought this thing in good conscience, supposedly from the father's family, his descendants, but who knows if it's the genuine article or if it's a well-crafted forgery. It's impossible to tell for sure. But I was so excited that he would, after the show, take it out, set it down, and he would allow me to literally read it, and he would allow you to try and perform psychometry, I believe is the term, right? Mm-hmm. Where we would see what energies you picked up. And I will let you pick up the tale from here.
We were sat around this table with the Exorcist diary. I was like a kid in a candy store. You had already had the opportunity to read through it. And we decided to do EVP sessions to see if we picked up anything and if I could pick up anything from the book. And it was like something out of a movie because we're in the haunted Stanley Hotel. The inspiration for The Shining. We're sat with this book. It strikes midnight and we start our EVP session. You couldn't have written it any better. And I was so excited and we got nothing. Nothing. Not a single EVP. I didn't pick up anything from the book at all. It could have been any other empty notebook sat in front of me, and I was so bitterly disappointed.
I was initially, and then I was so thrilled because, there's that old saying that if something looks too good to be true, it usually is. And it would have been the perfect, if you had picked up on this malevolent, malign, evil, demonic energy, it would have been great for my chapter ending, right? But by the same token, it almost looks too good to be true. And you and I know real life does not work that way.
No, absolutely.
Stories don't get wrapped up in a neat little bow. So it seemed more real, more visceral, completely honest for you to read it. And I am sitting there willing you to say something. The sweat is just beating on my forehead. I'm literally typing out this stuff in my head, writing phrases in my head that I'm going to commit to the keyboard when I get home. I'm like, come on. This book was at ground zero for the defining exorcism of human history. You know, the one that without this case, we would never have seen Linda Blair levitate, her head turning 360, projectile cannons of pea soup, all that kind of stuff would never have happened. And you're getting nothing. But that's honest. And that's what writing is. You know, people will come along for you, the story with you for the story, but they expect truth. And there are some individuals in the field, I'm sure, that would have spruced it up, sexed it up, called it what you will. Come on, MJ, you sure you don't pick up a little? So, like, peer pressure can be a powerful thing. But I have enough faith in your mediumship abilities to be like, okay, she's picking up nothing. We've got nothing. Maybe this is, in fact, a clever forgery that Aiden was duped into obtaining. Maybe the book was so blessed because it was there day in and day out, you know, that it has essentially been sandblasted of any evil attachments it may have had. I don't know. You don't know.
It also has medallions inside, protective medallions inside the book.
St. Michael's.
Yeah, it is also kept in a case with St. Michael's medallions and crosses. And so perhaps, you know, if there was anything negative attached to it, I don't think it would stick around with all of that going on, you know. I was so disappointed. It would have been such a great ending.
It would, but again, I will never forget that night, and I will always take the difficult truth over the easier to swallow fiction when it comes to my writing. So, you know, that's why I put in the book that I cannot even verify that this is what it purports to be, but it was too good an opportunity to pass up to try it out and see. So it ended the way it was supposed to end.
Completely agree with that. We are going to take a very quick break, but stay tuned because there is a little announcement about my new paranormal card game up next.
Are you ready to take your love of the paranormal to a whole new level of absurdity? Introducing Paranormal Profanities, the card game where ghosts, aliens, cryptids, and downright ridiculous situations collide in a whirlwind of humor that'll leave you questioning your life choices and laughing uncontrollably. This isn't your average card game. Paranormal Profanities is packed with 600 cards of outrageous, inappropriate, and laugh-out-loud funny scenarios, perfect for 4 or more players. This game will have you and your friends howling as you summon the most bizarre, hilarious, and, well, profanely paranormal situations you could ever imagine. Grab your friends, prepare for paranormal chaos, and dive headfirst into Paranormal Profanities. We guarantee you'll laugh until you're crying, and possibly summon something else. But we can't be responsible for that. Paranormal Profanities, a disgusting card game for paranormal enthusiasts, only for the brave or the very, very twisted. But fair warning, this game is not for the faint of heart. It's for players 18 plus with a very strong sense of humor. Easily offended? You might want to stick to your grandma's board game collection. We are not responsible for any haunting laughter that may follow. Pre-order your deck today by emailing mj@sageparanormal.co.uk or visit www.sageparanormal.co.uk for more information. Paranormal Profanities. Get yours before it gets you.
Don't be scared.
I am so excited. Finally, my Paranormal Profanities brand new version is available for pre-orders. So guys, if you would like your very own deck of Paranormal Profanities, it is chaos. I'm telling you now, it is absolute chaos. But if you would like to pre-order your copy of this game, please do send me an email, mj@sageparanormal.co.uk. Right, let's get back to the show, shall we? I am here with my very dear friend, author Richard Estep, and we are going to be discussing a very serious serial killer case. Now, Richard wrote a book about this called The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm. So you don't only write paranormal books. I mean, you've written books on war, the Civil War. You've written books on true crime and serial killers. And recently, there's been a documentary that was released, and you wrote a book about the murders of Fox Hollow Farm. And now they've released, was it Disney? And I'm not too sure, where did it air in the States?
Yeah, so in the States, it airs on Hulu, which is owned by Disney. So you are right. And in the UK, Disney Plus, I believe.
Yes. And I've literally just sat down and watched the documentary. It is a fascinating case, the Fox Hollow Farm murders with Herb Baumeister. Could you take us through a little bit of the history of the case, what actually happened, and some of your investigation?
Yes, I can, MJ. You know, the trailer for the show put it better than I ever could have, which kind of embarrassed me. They said that this is the Dharma that you never heard of. And it's absolutely true. You know, we say serial killer and some names come to mind immediately. Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer. We can see their faces peering back at us. You know, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Maybe Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. But almost nobody, until at least the documentary came out, ever heard of Herb Baumeister. He was a guy who owned a chain of thrift stores. In Britain, they would be called like Poundland. A name that Americans find hysterically funny for reasons they should explain at a later time. And Herb made his fortune on that. Now, to all outside appearances, he's the normal, average, you know, American male. Wife, kids, a home, you know, white picket fence. He lives on this 18-acre faux Tudor farm called Fox Hollow Farm and lives an idyllic life. But all is not well underneath the surface. So what's actually happening is that Herb is secretly gay. And on the weekends, by the way, this is taking place in the early 90s. So when his wife is taking the kids to Lake Wawasee, they have a lake house there that they will go to some weekends. Herb stays home and he goes into Indianapolis, the nearest major city, where he tells people his name is Brian Smart. And he tells people that he is a construction worker. And that he's working on this very cool house that has a pool, a swimming pool in the basement. And hey, you know, he's got some drink and he's got some drugs. He's in gay bars and he's asking these men if they want to come back and party with him. Now, it's important to put this in context. If you're not old enough to remember the 90s, gay men and women were marginalized. They were ostracized. Bigotry was at an extremely high level. Many of them were thrown out of their families for being gay. And so, you know, the only people they really had were one another. And it soon became apparent to members of Indianapolis's gay community, these men were disappearing. Some of their friends would just simply not come back. And they would be seen leaving a nightclub with this fairly ordinary looking man, clubs like the 501 Tavern and places that were well-known gay hangouts. It reached a point where they were putting their own missing posters together, flyers, and putting them up in clubs and on the streets. And of course, Herb Baumeister, who was doing this, was bringing them home to Fox Hollow Farm and murdering them in his basement, either in the pool or the poolside bar. And then he would drag the bodies out into the woods behind the farm. He would cut them up, crush them up, mulch them, set them on fire, all in an attempt to destroy the evidence. What he did not do was bury them, which turned out to be a curse for the investigators when the case came to light, because the nocturnal critters, the foxes, the badgers, all kinds of animals, woodland animals, took the remains of these men and scattered them far and wide. So by the time the authorities got wind of this and they descended on Fox Hollow Farm, there were over 10,000 bone fragments to be found. And those are just the ones that were found. Many more were not. They've been scattered by the animals. It's said that this is the second largest bone identification, human remain identification project in U.S. history, second only to the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks. So that's an overview of the case. Baumeister, when he got wind that the police were after him, drove to Canada, took his dad's .357 Magnum, which he nicknamed Dirty Harry, and shot himself in the head. Wrote a suicide note that apologized for being a terrible husband, not a great father, his business was failing. Didn't mention anything about the fact that that he had left anywhere between like 10, 12, maybe more men rotting in the woods behind his house. And it was only when the police started, whenever there's a serial killer case, the detectives will look into missing person cases in the area to see if they tie in. And it's only then that they noticed that there was a string throughout the 80s of murders along the interstate I-70 in Indianapolis and Ohio. So Indiana, I'm sorry, and Ohio. These were all young men. One was a boy as young as 14. They were all strangled, as the Fox Hollow victims were. Most of them were found in a state of undress. And those murders stopped in 1991 when the Baumeisters moved into Fox Hollow Farm. So Herb is known as the I-70 Strangler.
It is scary to think how many other missing people there might be, or how many other bodies are yet to be found on that property. I have a feeling there's a lot more. I just have this feeling there's so many more.
There are no bodies to be found, but there are fragments.
Fragments, yeah.
Hard, isn't it? Because remains have been turning up for years. A bit of femur here, a bit of radius there, and I think that will continue to happen. I have so much sympathy for the men and women that worked the investigation. They brought in the local fire department. They brought in volunteers. These people spent days on their knees under the guidance of a forensic anthropologist, Dr. Stephen Narocki, trying to, they treated it like an archaeologist would a dig. They gridded the area and they just sifted through handful of earth after handful of earth, trying to find these remains. And it's impossible to, or all but impossible to identify them all. One thing I am very pleased to say, though, is that in the aftermath of the Fox Hollow murders airing on television, it dropped here in the US on February 18th. Hundreds of people are now coming forward to offer up DNA samples with the hopes of matching them with some of those recovered men. So at the very least, those poor souls need to be identified and given some form of burial ceremony.
Just the closure for the families alone, that that means more than anything, than writing a book, than making a show, than anything. It's the one good thing that comes out of this.
This is one of those books I debated about writing because nothing worried me more than upsetting people who had lost loved ones to this monster, and then putting the idea in their head that their loved ones may still haunt Fox Hollow Farm. However, I thought about it, and number one, Ghost Adventures had already covered the case on television. So the story of the haunting was out there. A filmmaker called Dan Hall had also made a documentary movie about it. But it wasn't being spoken about. These men were forgotten. Their names were just not out there. They were, and some of them still are, sitting in cardboard evidence boxes on shelves, as opposed to buried and named. And so, I thought, if I write this, I can at least investigate myself and I can tell the story. And if I do my job well, and I pride myself on doing the best job I can, I won't sensationalize it. I'm not looking to make this ghoulish or garish, I don't want the wrong people to get their jollies from reading this. But maybe we can tell this story sensitively and shed some light on these awful events.
Let's take a bit of time to talk about your investigation, because you actually swam in the swimming pool and you did a tour of the house, you did your own investigation, and you captured some pretty creepy evidence as well.
Yeah. Not throwing any shade, but when I saw the Ghost Adventures episode, they shot around the swimming pool where most of the murders took place, where most of the victims are believed to have been strangled. And I can't understand why you wouldn't get in the pool if you're investigating. That didn't happen on the show. So unfortunately, I went there during a particularly cold weather period, and the owner of the place said, Richard, I like you, but not enough to spend $800 on heating the pool. They only heat the pool for a certain part of the year, and it costs about $800 to bring it up to temperature and keep it there. I'd naively assumed that, heating up a pool is no different than flipping a light switch. Well, it takes time and it takes a bunch of money. So I went in cold, and it was brutally cold. I mean, it was freezing cold. And then you have that knowledge that the pool you're in, some men entered and did not come out alive. But we tried to set the mood. So talking to someone who knew Herb Baumeister, they said that his favorite song was Blue Bayou by Linda Ronstadt. So I put that in my iTunes library, took down the lights, opened the French windows to let in some of the even colder night air, because that is what Baumeister did in order to create steam. When the water was warm and the cold air came in, the two air temperatures mixed, you got steam. And that made for a disorienting environment for his victims, entirely by his design. So we did that, and I got growled at in the pool. I recorded a very creepy EVP, which obviously none of us heard at the time, that said the word Laura, which happens to be my wife's name as well. And then we spent some time in the pool room, the pump room, which is directly off from the pool. And it's said to be where Baumeister, because it's a cool, dark place with a concrete floor, where he laid out the bodies of his victims prior to disposing of them. So they would have laid there for hours or maybe even a day or so. And something, I can still feel it as I tell you this, something brushed fingertips along the underside of my tricep. I had a t-shirt on and my bare underarm, and it was, I hate using this word, but there's no better word I have for it. It was a caress.
Oh, no.
And we all talk about, you might get scratched, you might get shoved. Hands down, the worst physical thing to ever happen to me in this field was being stroked on the bare arm in that pool room.
Oh, no, that is worse than being scratched. That is so much worse than being scratched. Ew. Oh, my goodness. Let's chat about some of your recent book projects and what you have coming up next.
Absolutely. Well, next week, March 11th, sees the release of Dark Spirits. That's kind of remember those, now that's what I call music CDs, album compilations. I kind of think of it as one of those sort of books. I write those for Visible Ink Press, and I love them because they are kind of like bite-sized chapters where I get to look at some of the darker aspects of the paranormal. So I do get to talk about things like possession and, cases in which Ouija boards did not necessarily go well. I get to talk about things like the Bermuda Triangle and alien abductions and stuff like that. And, kind of like waiting for a bus. If you don't like this chapter, there'll be another one right around the corner. So those books are immensely fun to write. I really enjoy doing them. They're the kind of books I used to get on Christmas morning as a boy, and they gave you just enough information to then go out and seek, more dense books on the subject. So Dark Spirits, very, very fun book to write. Oh, let's see. Mothman. That is written with Tobias Wayland, a cryptozoologist, a Fortean researcher, and we went on the trail of Mothman. It's something that I've just found fascinating for so long, and Mothman just seems to be gaining in popularity with every passing week. He is everywhere. And much like In Search of Demons, it has the same publisher and a similar format. We hit the road and we decided that we were going to try and find Mothman. So not only did we go to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is kind of the place everybody knows best, but we went to Rockford, Illinois, and there are Mothman sightings galore in Chicago. Even Chicago O'Hare Airport has its Mothman stories. So we wanted to kind of get out there. And I know that we recorded, it was your birthday over that trip, and we recorded a Mothman-themed birthday greeting for you in the TNT silo.
That is one of my favorite birthday messages that I've ever received. It was just the Mothman onesie fluttering past, or the outfit.
Yeah, I'd love to say it was a genuine Mothman encounter. My fellow author Erin Taylor donned a Mothman onesie while her husband Mike filmed and ran around in the background. But we are in one of those silos,
which is amazing.
The Mothman story. It's kind of cool to just be there doing EVP experiments and watching for the lights in the sky that were connected with the Mothman case. So that comes out September 8th or 9th from Llewellyn. And I say 8th or 9th because my other next release that's scheduled is Ghostly Encounters. And that is my look at some of the cases I was just fascinated with growing up. So Borley Rectory being one that every British person with a passing interest in the paranormal will know. I get to talk about that. The R101 airship ghosts. Here in the States, the Bell Witch of Tennessee, my beloved Gettysburg, and things like that. As we speak right now, I am currently working on a book about cryptids, again for Visible Ink Press. It will be another one of those, now that's what I call cryptids books, coming out February next year, and a book about Tombstone, Arizona, called The Tombstone Dead, Ghost in the Town That's Too Tough to Die. So lots coming from me this year.
Where can people find your books and a bit more information about you and what you do?
I hope they find them on their bookshelves, but if not, you can go to any online retailer or any physical bookstore. We'll stock them in the UK, Waterstones in the US, Barnes and Noble. You can certainly give Uncle Jeff Bezos your money if you like, but you can just as easily ask your favorite local small village or small town bookstore to order them in for you. And I'm just as happy if you do that too. Come find me on social media. You can find me on Twitter as Estep Richard Estep Author on Facebook, Instagram, estep.richard, and richardestep.net is my website, which is in dire need of an update.
And you are also on Patreon. So your Patreon members receive physical copies of your book, and they also get to read the behind the scenes and read chapters before it's released.
Yeah, I always think of Patreon as like my personal book club. It's a great way to read the book as I'm writing it. And I post chapters of everything I'm working on as we go along. So you not only get to read it before anybody else, but you get to offer input and feedback. I do haunted hangouts, Zoom meetings. I did one from Pengasik Castle in Cornwall just last month, and I'll be doing one. You and I, I'm sure, will be doing one from Ashmore, right, MJ?
Absolutely.
So you get a chance to interact with me in those kind of environments as well. But it's a great way for me to put signed books into the hands of readers, and that way we're all happy.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the chats and for being on the Supernatural tapes. I really appreciate just getting to hang out with you. We need to catch up more. This was great.
Thanks for having me, my friend. It's been a pleasure as always. And I will see you just next month in Ashmore Estates, the Haunted Poor Farm.
Can't wait. Look forward to it. We'll speak to you soon. Bye, Richard.
Bye.
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed having a conversation with Richard. Please spread the word and tell your friends where they can find this podcast. Tell them to give it a listen. And I will be back soon with another episode of the Supernatural tapes. Happy hauntings!
You're listening to the Supernatural Tapes podcast, your home for all things strange.